Welcome everybody. We'll allow a minute here for people to get joined into the session and then we'll get started. See, we have a full panel and the attendees are jumping into the session. Just give one more second and then go ahead and start. Well, okay. Welcome to our first panel of our virtual Midwest SME Forum. This one is presented by the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. So our big thanks go out to the state of Wisconsin, and Missy Hughes is here to talk to us on the panel in a second. But this is really about state support for businesses in this unprecedented time, an overused word. But many of the challenges that are facing the country right now in the pandemic are topics that have been put into the space of the states. And so the states are the ones tackling a lot of these challenges with local businesses, with industry, and we're excited because we have representatives really around our region to talk about that, both from the state side itself as well as representing business, and then also from Washington. So I think we're adding in Iowa is now 2, and we'll jump in there. Mark Lorenzo. Mark, they should be adding you as a presenter right now. Otherwise, you can click on the other link and jump in. But I'll quick introduction to our panelists, if we'll advance the slide. And through our presentations here, our attendees will be muted during the presentation. The best thing to do is there's a question box, and go ahead and type your questions into the question box, and then we'll get to your questions in the Q&A section. And if it's working in this one, we'll also be able to let people raise their hand and ask the question via audio. So if we get to that session, go ahead and introduce yourself, and unmute your microphone. And for those who want to ask the question directly, hopefully we'll have that option as well. So our panelists today, if you'll advance the slide, is around state support for business. We have Wisconsin Economic Development, I better get this right, Missy, right? Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation Secretary and CEO, Missy Hughes, with us today. Thank you very much for joining us, Missy. We'll have Mark Denzler, the President and CEO of the Illinois Manufacturers Association, Mark Lorenzo, Manager of Business Development from the Iowa Economic Development Authority, and Dr. Krzysztof Simoniak, the Senior Regional or Director of Regional Economic Policy and the World Bank Liaison for our colleagues in Washington, the representative of German Industry and Trade. And then we'll also have Vlatko Tomek-Bobas. Vlatko's the Investment Promotion Director for Europe and in charge of foreign direct investment for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. So as you can see, key states for our region as the Midwest, and in some cases differing approaches to things they're offering, but all very much supportive of German investment within their region. So with that, we'll go ahead and start off with our panelists introducing themselves, and I'll assume that we're going to get Mark Lorenzo up on the screen here in a second too. But Missy Hughes, Secretary and CEO for Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Missy, the floor is yours, right in the middle of my screen.
Thanks, Mark, and good morning, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here on behalf of WEDC and pleased to be able to support this panel and the good work of GACC. So first and foremost, I think it's great to level set that Wisconsin has incredibly deep roots with Germany, going back many, many years. With brewers and all of the different folks who have come to Wisconsin But I think I also just want to add that I have deep roots with Germany. My mother was full German. Her parents came to the United States in the mid-30s from Wiesbaden, and they were actually sponsored by the Anheuser-Busch family. My grandmother was a nanny for the Anheuser-Busch and came first to St. Louis, then they went back to Wiesbaden, and then they ended up in Queens in New York, and my mom was born there and raised, but I have deep ties to Germany. I was able to go a number of times and visit Germany with my mother, so it's a sweet spot in my heart. But let's go to the next slide and let's talk a little bit about Wisconsin and our ties to Germany and also what we can offer. So this slide really demonstrates what Wisconsin offers to international companies who want to come to the United States. What's critical here, as with my other state colleagues, is the Midwest accessibility to the whole of the United States and Canada. You'll see the railroads and the commercial airports. We have lots of different ways into the United States, and then you're able to get right to Canada and throughout the United States on many different routes. And so it's really critical to see that. But the other thing I want to point out just about this slide is going back to Germany. If you look at 3/4 of Wisconsin's borders are freshwater. And one of the reasons that the Germans came and were able to settle in Wisconsin is because of our connection to fresh water, the amazing water that then enabled us to brew amazing beer. So we have a deep root in our fresh water and our deep root with Germany. And we've got now over nearly 100 companies that have operations, German companies that have operations in Wisconsin, and then almost 50 companies in Wisconsin that have operations in Germany. So really close tie there. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that the workforce in Wisconsin is, I think, one of our best strengths. And we have an incredible education system that then creates a workforce that's available for companies that are interested in doing operations here, having operations here. And, you know, it's really critical that education is part of our DNA. We have, you know, a farmer DNA, a brewer DNA, and that's hard workers, right? But there's a mindset there that's always about learning and always about moving forward. And it's one of those things that I'm really thinking about as, you know, we've gone through the trauma of COVID, we're still a little bit in it, but thinking about, you know, how do we use our education, this thing that we've built up over years and years, to help us propel forward. The other piece that I just want to add on here is the average travel time to work of 22 minutes. One of the things, having been a New Yorker, I mentioned my mom was a New Yorker, I grew up right outside of the city. Getting anywhere in 22 minutes is impossible. But in Wisconsin, we're able to do that, as you are in Iowa and Illinois, and maybe not quite in Chicago, Mark, you'll have to touch on that. But, you know, it makes, what really that demonstrates is an ease of operations here, an ease of moving around, an ease of getting things done. And it's really critical, you know, as businesses think about where to locate and what to do, the ease of making things work is immeasurable. And then the last slide I just want to touch on is the breadth of industry that we have in Wisconsin is really shown by our gross domestic product. We've got $350 billion worth of GDP, and if we get to that slide, we'll be able to see that it's in a huge different variety of industries and businesses. But, you know, manufacturing obviously is very critical to Wisconsin, and the other includes a lot of agriculture. So we really have a very diverse trade that happens in Wisconsin, and we have again, you know, relations with Germany that resulted in our exporting almost $1 billion worth of products to Germany in 2019, and then importing almost $2 billion worth of products from Germany. So we have a lot of trade happening with Germany, and, you know, it's our hope that we can continue to have this strong relationship and work together, you know, especially in the face of what we're all facing right now. Our international business in Wisconsin is going to be critical to our recovery, and so we'll be putting a lot of importance on that and thinking a lot about it and understanding what has happened with this disruption and how we can, maybe find opportunity in it and work on that. So with that, Mark, I will turn it back over to you and get through the rest of the team. And you're muted, Mark.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for the hint. Didn't want to chime in on your comments, but up next is Michigan, and Vlatko, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Missy, for that overview. I'm excited to be on the panel to represent Michigan. And just a quick introduction. Again, my name is Vlatko Tomic-Bobis. I represent the state of Michigan and handle the foreign direct investment from Europe into Michigan. I've been with the state here for right about 10 years. And, this whole phrase, economic development, what does that really mean? Just so we're clear, that is the Wirtschaftsförderung für Michigan. As Missy, I think everybody on the panel actually has some ties to Germany, with me specifically having grown up in Cologne and spent most of my life there before relocating to Michigan. If we could go to the next slide, please. In terms of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, I think I think I have to hit on this point in terms of the impact of COVID-19 onto each one of our states. I think has really shown this approach where every state has been forced to respond independently to meet the business needs and also to keep its employees and citizens safe. What's unique about Michigan, we were one of the first states to actually respond to the pandemic and have also reallocated all of our resources to meet the growing need for capital to pivot business operations in the state to address PPE demand and other critical pieces. Next slide, please. And when it comes to Michigan, our state is roughly 10 million, has a population of roughly 10 million people. Of that, roughly 5 million is our workforce. And in terms of our key industries, we're looking at automotive, mobility, advanced manufacturing, aerospace, and information technology. To give you an idea of the impact of the automotive industry in our state, we have 18 OEMs present in our state and 96 of the top 100 suppliers. So the impact of COVID-19 has been really, really huge, as many of these companies were forced to rethink operations and to enable the new measures to make sure our state is keeping its employees safe. Our top goal of the MEDC is to sustain growth and equitable growth to drive medium household income within our state and to attain the talent gain within the Midwest that we have experienced over the last year. Michigan is also home to roughly 415 German corporates. As you would imagine, some of the major OEMs call Michigan their home, Volkswagen, Daimler, and as well as the entire supply chain, everybody from Bosch to Mahle, Schwabische Werkzeugmaschinen, Brose, and the list goes on and on. So we have a deep connection with Germany from an investment perspective, but also from an employment perspective. To give you the kind of the number, our state has attracted $2.5 billion in private sector investment over the last 5 years, solely from Germany. It's been a remarkable growth pattern that we're looking now to sustain in the pandemic. Next slide, please. Just really quickly here, I know I'm running out of time and Mark is looking at me, but to give you just a snapshot of, how have we managed through this pandemic? And I think it's the resilience on a skilled workforce that have made Michigan really great. It's all of the public-private collaborations and partnerships that we have developed, and also the manufacturing expertise within our state. Being home to GM, FCA, just has been an incredibly beneficial piece. Next slide, please. In terms of resources that we have reallocated in face of the pandemic, we have kind of pivoted from our traditional model and have developed 3 buckets to assist companies. One being something that we call the Pure Michigan Business Connect Virtual Procurement Program, where companies, regardless of where they're from, they can establish an account, log in, and see all of the PPE demand that the state and the state's corporates are facing, and they can bid on those contracts directly to meet that supply. The other piece is the Emergency Access and Retooling Grants Program, and this has been established to allow companies that are in the manufacturing segment to pivot their production to meet demands for masks, for gloves, and other PPE equipment. And then lastly, but certainly not least, is access to capital. I mean, we understand that companies are facing an incredible burden right now, given everything that's going on, and we have made that process a lot simpler and a lot more actionable, so to say, and efficient. And if we go to the next slide, please, just really quick, we have also engaged with our governor's office to develop a safe restart and reopening of our economy and a phased approach, where we track the sustained reduction in infectious rates, and we have enhanced the ability to test and trace, and then also to assure there's a sufficient healthcare capacity to handle the resurgence. And then lastly, but certainly not least, we have worked with our private sector and the different groups to develop best practices that we can share between the corporates as these companies are coming back online to make sure things are as safe as they could be given the situation that we're all in. And with that, that's my quick 2 minutes about Michigan. Thank you, Mark.
The quick 2 minutes, but we'll jump in and change direction a little bit now with Mark Denzler from the Illinois Manufacturers Association, one of our board members and a valued contributor on many levels. Mark, I'll turn over the screen to you.
Well, thank you, Mark, and I'd like to echo the others and first thank the German American Chamber of Commerce for hosting this. I'd like to thank Missy and WEDC. And Missy, 2 things: I do drink beer, number 1, and number 2, we actually exported someone from Springfield, where I live right now, Malik Turner, who signed with the Packers yesterday. So you have a new wide receiver. So I'm rooting for him except when they play the Bears. It's a pleasure to be here today, and you can flip to the next slide. Briefly about the Illinois Manufacturers Association. We are the oldest state manufacturing association in the United States, founded in 1893. We currently represent about 4,000 member companies and facilities across the entire state that range from the Fortune 50 to your small tool and die shops and fab shops across the entire state. Manufacturing, specifically in Illinois, employs just under 600,000 individuals, men and women, on the factory floors. They produce about 12.5% of our state's GDP, which is the single largest sector in Illinois. And as we all know, every manufacturing job creates an additional 1.6 jobs, and every dollar invested in manufacturing creates $1.89 in economic activity. So manufacturing is an extremely integral part of not only Illinois, but the industrial Midwest, all of the states that are on the call today. And our relationship with Germany, and Mark talked about, I'm very proud to be on the German American Chamber of Board. We partner with them on the ICAT apprenticeship program, which is extremely important. And just our history with Germany, Germany ranks 3rd when it comes to FDI, foreign direct investment, in the state of Illinois. They have about 36,000 men and women that are working in Illinois in about 828 different locations. Germany is our 4th largest trading partner. Primarily chemicals and heavy equipment are our 2 largest sectors. And much like every other state, we're extremely proud of the benefits that we have in Illinois. Our central location, access to water, our very strong infrastructure system. We just passed the capital bill a year or so ago, so we're making significant investments in the state. We have everything from global airport, global city, the waterways, the Mississippi River. We're the only state with all 7 Class 1 railroads to cross it. We have a great pipeline, world-class institutions and colleges and schools, a skilled workforce. So we have a lot of things going for us, and not only in Illinois, but in the Midwest. I mean, we're great partners with our friends in Wisconsin or Indiana or Iowa or Michigan, because some of these projects, as you know, are regional in nature. And Mark and I traveled to Germany with the governor, I think, Mark, 2 years ago, and We're pleased since then, when you talk about German companies in Illinois, that after that trip, Harting announced an investment in Illinois, Faber-Castell, in addition to companies like Fresenius Kabi and Siemens and Bosch and others. So again, very proud of our partnership with the German American Chamber. You can flip to the next slide as well, and I'll be very quickly during COVID, because I know that'll be the big key. But our role in COVID, certainly as a trade association, is communicating with our members and working with partners such as the German American Chamber of Commerce. The IMA was asked to do a couple things. We chaired the governor's task force on equipment, helping procure equipment, helping companies retool their facilities. We've had more than 1,000 Illinois manufacturers join this effort to date. And then Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot asked me to asked me to lead the B2B group, which was developing the guidelines for manufacturing, transportation, warehousing, construction, utilities. So I was in charge of that team that helped write Chicago's reopening guidelines. So we've been very involved at the ground level, just in terms of helping companies operate. The IMA drafted the essential manufacturing language, and about 70% of our companies continue to operate. And I'll just close with, I know we have a lot to talk about today, but how proud I am of all the manufacturers in Illinois and across the country that have helped us get through. We've met every challenge in our nation's history. Manufacturing will continue to lead us out of this, and look forward to a great discussion today. So thanks for having me, Mark, and Missy, appreciate your support.
Glad you're here today, Mark. Our next panelist, I hope he can join. I mentioned Mark Lorenzo from the state of Iowa. And Mark, as soon as we hear your voice, you can chime in, but otherwise, as a native Iowan, give a little bit of the commercial for Iowa. We've heard about the states here in the Midwest. Iowa has been a longtime partner of the German American Chamber, and if you'll flip to the next slide, there again, if Mark Lorenzo chimes in.
Yeah, Mark, can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Thank you. Perfect timing.
Very good.
Camera on too.
I'm not sure why that is the issue. I'm running well. First of all, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much. This is Mark Lorenzo, the Iowa Economic Development Authority. Kind of operating with no power here for a few days. We just had a very intense derecho storm blow through yesterday. So the same winds that help us lead the nation in renewable wind energy sometimes go a little too fast, and that was the problem. So kind of operating here in the dark, so to speak, but glad to join today. If you want to go to the second slide, sometimes you have to click through that a little bit. Thank you very much. Just to introduce the state of Iowa, and again, pleased to join our neighbors here today. Iowa is very proud of its heritage, especially German heritage. We've had an office in the EU, in Europe, and now the EU in Frankfurt for over 40 years, and my colleagues do an extremely good job there. A couple comments about our COVID response, just to give you an update. Similar to the rest of the states, we have had a very active role working with our sister agencies across state government, especially public health and Iowa workforce, on working with guidelines and testing and working with companies directly. We've had colleagues on that. We've had directly small business relief efforts that have come and passed. We have now an energy program to, if you will, assist with suspensions and shutoffs. But our focus right now is putting all our information to accessible social media under the hashtag Iowans Unite. And it really is a focus on small business, the stories that they have, and the sharing. And we're having media partnerships to help us do this. And then some very specific tools to really help business where it counts. ShopIowa.com and our Gift Iowa Marketplace. So all under the thisisiowa.com, an update is always available on what's going on with those efforts. And obviously they're still underway. I'll also talk a little bit about our, we lead by strategic planning. In fact, Governor Reynolds led our updated Iowa energy plan several years ago. And this has provided us a real focus on expanded investment, renewable energy, and biomass processing. We continue to focus on our educational system, human talent development through STEM and innovation focus. And as an agency, we have, if you will, full support expansion plans, support plans for bioscience and manufacturing especially. And some of the other notable aspects, as you can see in this slide, is we're literally positioned in the center of North America with those same efficient Class 1 railroad links, the Mississippi barge access that's so important to us, and the major north-south Canada-Mexico-US highway, and east-west on Interstate 30. So the other thing I'd like to mention, again, a little bit more on renewable energy, is we currently have over 40% and will be shortly 50% of our total wind power, or our total energy portfolio in renewable wind power. So if you add to that our leading, if you will, production of renewable transport fuels, Iowa really is the renewable energy state. And coming from an agricultural state, it's an interesting transition that we think really talks about the intersection of agriculture and advanced manufacturing. So I like to ask companies, where will they be manufacturing sustainable low carbon products of the future? I hope it's something that we can talk about. Some of our other key advantages, again, our refundable R&D tax credit to drive innovation, our right to work status, and again, our blessed with the agro-bioscience concentration that we have. If you want to go to the next slide. Just quickly a snapshot of today, three very, if you will, common looking verticals for us: advanced manufacturing, agro-bioscience, and insurance. So Iowa is a manufacturing state. Our largest share of our gross state product is manufacturing, and the second is finance and insurance. And these are two, if you will, centers and reasons of pride for us, discussions of pride for us. One other is then our professional, scientific, and R&D services are actually quite a significant share of our gross state product as well. And we're a state that generally is second or third in the nation in terms of total agricultural cash receipts as well. So, and just quickly, I wanted to demonstrate some of the companies currently operating in our state. Siemens has world-leading blade manufacturing operation. Boehringer Ingelheim doing so much for the vaccines and immunotherapy work, and AirAg, one of the, if you will, financial insurance innovators as well. And you can see the information. Iowa's been able to leverage its strategic advantages, and again, certainly working with our global offices and looking at foreign direct investment, which has grown very significantly, both in terms of number of foreign registered companies, cash investment in Iowa, and if you will, total concentration in the state as well. If you want to go to the next slide. Thank you. I'd like to give you just a snapshot of the future opportunities for us as well. Again, based on our planning efforts and our focus on the 21st century bioeconomy, first and foremost, need I say more during COVID, but vaccines and immunotherapy. We look at health in the One Health, if you will, arena, and that is the collaborative efforts of human medicine, veterinary medicine, and other life sciences that really look at the intersection of animals, health, and the environment. Certainly in 2015 and in subsequent years, Iowa really suffered in 2015 with the avian influenza, which really devastated poultry, and again, really underscores the importance of that. So, you know, looking ahead to the future, we've based accelerators around these technologies, both in agriculture and insurtech, and again, continue to look at innovative and additive manufacturing as well. So I'll stop there, and again, appreciate the opportunity, and certainly would like to appreciate being part of the rest of the discussion.
Well, Mark, glad your voice jumped in there. You did a heck of a lot better job representing Iowa than I would have.
Thank you.
And let's jump to DC now. Krzysztof Szymoniak from RGIT. I think first of all, people want to understand better what RGIT does. So go ahead, Krzysztof.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for the introduction, and it's my pleasure to be here virtually in Chicago and presenting a little bit from the DC perspective. The representative of German Industry and Trade is a joint office of the Federation of German Industries, BDI, and the Association of German Chambers of Commerce, the DIHK. So through the DIHK and its foreign chamber network abroad, we are collaborating closely with our good friends and with the GACC Midwest, with Mark, so we have close ties here. We are based in Washington, DC in order to keep the communications open to the Congress, to the administration, and to order to encourage the deepening of the US-German economic and trade relationship. And we are doing this for quite a while. We're in Washington since '88, so 32 years. I'm with RGIT 12 years, and we strongly believe our work is really important, because when we have a closer look at the economic and trade relationship, when we go to the next slide, this next slide, yep, shows one one perspective why this trade and economic relationship is so important. It's not only the trade relationship. We all know that the US is for Germany the most important export market, and for the US, Germany is the sixth important export market. So the total trade volume is almost $190 billion. But this trade also translates into investments. We always like to say trade follows, investment follows trade, sorry, this way. Investment follows trades. And when we see what is going on in the US from a German perspective, we have more than 5,400 German-owned affiliates in the US that settled here over the years. Investment is always around 500, or now it's around 520 billion. So this slide is a little bit outdated. The BEA, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, just came out with its latest numbers, pushing Germany to the third position, the third most important foreign direct investor. But all these numbers and numbers of companies and investment, it's important, but even more important is what we like to showcase is how many jobs are actually created by German-owned affiliates. So right now, these numbers, we need to be a bit careful when we talk about this, because these numbers are always 2 years old. That's the latest you get from the Department of Commerce. But we have around 800,000 jobs. And more importantly, from these 800,000 jobs, 300,000 jobs are in the manufacturing sector. So these are jobs where things are being produced, and this also shows how important the US is as a location for German-owned companies in order to produce, in order to export from here to the rest of the world. And this is all this, and this has a positive contribution, we believe, to the overall US economy on the community, local, state, and federal level, and all this positive contribution. This is what we call German Business Matters. And you find all information, and that's my last sentence for now, on www.germanbusinessmatters.com. So you can click on all your respective states, and you see the job numbers created by German-owned affiliates, and the trade and the goods that are traded back and forth between your state and Germany.
And Christoph, I think you nailed it on the head that German Business Matters. You talked about a large share of those jobs, roughly 40% of the German jobs in the US being manufacturing, and every single one of the states that's represented here talked about manufacturing and the importance of manufacturing in their state. And that's true across the Midwest. So those two facts go hand in hand. I'd like to return a little bit to the states and our representatives, and we'll start with Missy. What are you doing now to support your SMEs in particular during COVID-19?
So we've been really focused in Wisconsin on our small businesses. As Mark mentioned, in Iowa, they were the ones who were really first impacted by COVID sweeping across and hitting, our communities, our restaurants, and our cafes. But throughout this process, we've also been really closely in communication with our SMEs and finding out, what's the impact that they're seeing. And in general, our manufacturing businesses were able to maintain their operations throughout the shut-in that we had, the safer at home order that our governor passed. But they have been showing some concerns about future orders and things like that. So what we're trying to do is to keep an eye, a critical eye on the impact that our small businesses are experiencing right now by providing them some grant funding, but also understanding the impact for third, fourth, first quarter of 2021 and thinking about orders and what we're seeing. We're seeing a fair amount of concern over capital expenditures and whether or not we'll see a fallback in those kind of orders of big equipment that Wisconsin is so specialized in making. So we've been setting up at WEDC a real emphasis on making sure we're doing what we can to help with the international side of things. In particular, we're talking and setting up virtual trade missions. Our first one is going to be with Germany. So recognizing that we're in a new world and jumping on a plane isn't something that we're always going to be doing. So I'm really excited about that because I think it's going to offer a lot of opportunities without the logistics that you experience when you go on a trade mission. And well, I'm sure we'll be learning as we go, and I hope we can find ways to share our learnings with our colleagues and be thinking about how can we really do this really well. And I think it's going to be critical as we've seen supply chain interruptions and things like that to make sure that we do what we can to repair that. We've also reached out to all of our international companies. I personally reached out to anyone who has foreign direct investment in Wisconsin to make sure that they have a direct line of communication to us if they're experiencing any challenges, and we've had great feedback on that and worked through a couple different issues that we've seen businesses experiencing. So just really trying to stay in touch with everybody as much as we can. I think my colleagues will say that communication throughout this whole process has been incredibly important to understand what's happening and to keep an eye on that horizon and what's coming towards us.
Well, you mentioned the virtual trade missions. We already had a virtual water trade delegation go to Wisconsin back in June, and thanks to WEDC for the help on that one. We'll have a lightweighting delegation to Michigan in a little bit, but Vlatko, what else is Michigan doing now forward looking? You talked about some of the things initially around PPE. Looking forward, what are you doing to support your SMEs?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I will first of all echo Missy's comments about communication, because that has been the number one, the most crucial piece that we have done with our existing German companies. We have staff that covers the entire region of Michigan, and we have really followed this campaign to make sure we stay connected to each one of them. Michigan did experience a stay-at-home order as well by Governor Whitmer that really shut the entire economy down. But part of the reopening plan that we have engaged has been based on the feedback that we have received from the existing German and other international companies. So we've developed guidelines how they can operate given within this pandemic. And then the other piece, we have partnered with our neighboring states to really develop plans that companies can implement, not just in our respective states, but also globally. Some of these, especially tier 1s, tier 2s, and even SMEs, have footprints in Asia that has experienced this type of slowdown and shutdown first, and then subsequently have experienced a reopening. And these are realities that companies are facing on a daily basis. So communication has been really key in this entire piece. And then the other item that stood out to me is how we engage with prospective new customers. Because the one piece that has been crucial that I'm sure Christoph will touch on is this whole travel restrictions that Europeans are facing and coming to the US. So as we're looking and working with prospective investors, the key piece that always comes up is what will happen to the travel restrictions on Europeans coming to the US. When you talk about site selection, evaluation, and those types of things, virtual is great, but they can honestly never replace that feedback that one gets by being in each one of our states and getting to know the community and getting to know the key pieces. So just again, I would say the communication piece and then the switch and pivot to virtual has been really huge for us.
Very good. And I think, Mark Lorenzo, you're still there on audio. If you want to mention what Iowa's been working on your SMEs.
Yes, I did mention, and again, I echo the comments being made, both communication and the importance. As I said, we've learned through having a series of programs, perhaps different, that it's important to tie them all together because people have a series of questions. And again, so our focus on the hashtag Iowans Unite to really put those stories in one place, to have them shared through media partnerships, and especially looking forward. Again, the opportunity to generate some retail activity when people can't go to places and can't purchase things. It has certainly been helpful. We've heard that from companies as well. I think the other thing I'd like to mention is certainly the food industry, so critical to Iowa, that critical workforce and those critical workers working through some of the very difficult, the nature of the, if you will, the nature of the industry, both on the workforce and again, food safety and all those issues that are always in place that we've learned and helped, if you will, transition some of that knowledge from large producers with much larger workforces to smaller companies as well.
So maybe Mark Denzler, if you want to talk about the state of Illinois, what's been particularly helpful that Illinois has done supporting the SMEs?
Sure, thanks. And echoing what everyone said, the most important thing is communication. As we all know, COVID, at the start of the year, unemployment was 3.5%. Our biggest challenge was finding workers, and suddenly this hit kind of in the February, March timeframe, and particularly those small and mid-sized companies. And within the IMA of our 4,000 members, 75% have 250 fewer employees. And so really educating them on the changing guidance, whether it was CDC regulations, OSHA reporting requirements, we had PPP, CARES Act, FFCRA. That was a lot to dump on to small and mid-sized companies, and they're really scrambling to figure out how to operate. And so we've hosted just the IMA. We've had more than 50 programs, 10,000 attendees, and a couple of specific things that we did is we created a reopening guide for all manufacturers so they could kind of check the boxes to make sure that they met federal or state requirements. That was so important. Rules on mask, and then certainly on the economic recovery piece, and every state, got some federal money, and then you had the federal programs like PPP, making sure they understood the guidelines and connecting them with experts that if they needed to make an application, did that. And it was amazing the number of people participating in seminars and picking up the phone and calling, because the small and mid-sized companies oftentimes don't have the law firms or the accounting firms or those experts they can go to on a regular basis. So doing that, and then secondly, really facilitating with the colleagues of the folks on the phone today, working with our Department of Commerce, our Department of Public Health, so advocating for changes. And again, a lot of the money coming out of Washington or Illinois is dedicated to small and mid-sized companies. Not so much the manufacturing, a lot was focused on retail and childcare, but with everyone going back to school today, it's one of the big issues we hear. How do I handle my employees who have a kid that maybe only goes to school a couple days a week or a part-time? And so really it's that education component, making sure they know what the latest rules or regs are, and then making sure they can operate safely. And first and foremost, manufacturers in particular, they're concerned about the safety of their employees, their customers, their vendors, and the public. And we want to make sure, as Mark just mentioned, the food supply chain was huge and there were some breakouts. So we worked specifically with some of the protein producers in Illinois to make sure that they had the PPE so that they could continue operating. And, every business has a little bit different nuance, but it really is that educational process, that communication, and then connecting them to the resources so they can get the help they need.
Mark, I want to credit the IMA, but also our states. We put up a COVID resource hub on our website linking to a lot of the information from the IMA, but also directly to the states. Every one of them represented here, had detailed information on their website, so that communication was there and available for the companies. And like you said, the small, medium-sized businesses don't have full-time people worried about this, that they could just say, okay, hey, you go worried only about COVID and get me all the information I need. And that's where it was very helpful for our membership from what you all provided. Speaking of information, Washington, Christoph, can you give us a little bit of an update on where we stand with the executive orders, negotiations in DC? What do you see coming out of DC right now, and particularly of relevance to small, mid-sized companies? Big question, right?
It's a big question. So you all have seen on the news that President Trump signed 4 executive orders or presidential actions, and because Congress cannot come to a compromise or they cannot agree, the talks have stalled. And so the move of President Trump to sign this executive order seems to be more like a potentially for accelerating the talks in Congress. So it's like twisting their arm a bit. He signed four executive orders. The first one is to provide an additional unemployment aid from the federal level. However, this has to be seen a bit carefully. It's not only from the federal level, it's also with the help from the states. So it would be the supplemental aid for unemployed people would be 300 from the feds, and then 100 it is expected it should be covered from the states. But we all know that, and you know this much better, that these states' budgets are pretty tight right now. Then the second order was to suspend the collection of payroll taxes. This created, it's my sense, more confusion for businesses than clarity. So it brought some uncertainty because it is not 100% clear. Is this now a permanent suspension, or do I have to pay then next January or next year the money I didn't pay this year? So this is not all clear. And President Trump reiterates he tries to make it permanent, but who knows what is going to happen there. So not a lot of clarity. The third one, to avoid evictions for renters and homeowners who need to pay their obligations, their mortgage and rents. But this is really more like directing the Treasury and the Housing and Urban Development Department to find assistance or potential money for helping pay these obligations. And so right now it's more directive. And the fourth one, to assist the student loan payments, that is also, so the 35 million students whose loans are backed by the government would benefit from this, but not the 8 million students who have loans with the private sector. And then there's a lot of criticism, of course, right now from especially from the Democrats. They are questioning the legality of the executive orders. They are arguing that the administration is breaching the congressional spending authority, because we all know funds need to be appropriated by Congress. And another criticism by the Democrats is that the executive orders wouldn't provide enough relief. And this is exactly the issue where both sides probably cannot agree on. So the Democrats in the House, they passed a bill, the HEROES Act, amounting to $3 trillion as a fifth stimulus package. And a lot of Republicans, they are now saying, like, this is way too much money. We really need to be careful. CBO just came out, the Congressional Budget Office just came out with a new report quoting that the federal budget deficit amounted to 2.8 trillion in the first 10 months of this fiscal year. So these are all numbers I cannot relate to anymore, to be quite frank. But it's interesting to compare to last year. So this is $1.9 trillion more than the deficit recorded at the same time last year. So, and Republicans, they are more and more Republicans, they are saying, like, we need to put a cap on the spending, and this is one of the many issues they cannot agree on. Yeah. But but there's a slight optimism, and in Washington, there's always optimism in Washington that they come to the table again, talks will start again, and there will be a compromise. There will be a fifth stimulus package helping individual businesses and states.
I think those are two words you don't always hear together: optimism and Washington. So maybe, well, I guess you guys were right at the beginning. RGIT told us very early on, hey, if there is another package that's going to come down to the wire, and this was way back over about a month and a half ago, I think, when that word came out, that so don't expect it anytime soon, I think was the motto back then.
Yeah.
Let's shift back a little bit to the states, and Missy, particularly Wisconsin. You know, looking at your economy, are there any sectors that surprised you as maybe being more resilient than you would have initially expected, or sectors that you thought did better and didn't need as much help from the state as you maybe thought they would have?
Yeah, I mean, we've had some really interesting developments. We had a number of businesses, manufacturers in particular in our paper industry, that pivoted to producing PPE. So we really saw some innovation there. We had a number of our brewers who pivoted to producing hand sanitizer. So to see that innovation was really exciting for me. You know, in kind of your old school manufacturing mindset, you think that you can't pivot that quickly. And so one of the things as we're moving forward that we're really thinking about is what enabled those businesses to be able to pivot so quickly? What was the culture of innovation that they had within their companies, and learning from that and being able to kind of capture that spirit of change and making that happen, and how can we you know, foster that elsewhere. We had the opportunity at WEDC, given to us by our legislature, to write a report on the impact of COVID-19 on all of Wisconsin's economy, and in particular on our agriculture, manufacturing, construction, forest products, retail, services, and tourism. So, and what would the plan for recovery be? So it was really, you know, just a little bit of homework, but it gave us a chance to look at the whole economy and really see where we had impact. And so coming out of that, I'll come back to this idea of innovation. And, you know, what we understand from talking with economists at UW or other folks is, in this moment, you'll see kind of a contraction, a fear of risk. And so we're really leaning into that concept of innovation, and how do we take what our amazing businesses did in this moment and propel us forward into new conversations and new opportunities, so that those businesses that were able to really pivot and be resilient, I think, are the ones that we're going to dig into and see how they can help us move forward.
It's a perfect segue to Mark Denzler, because Mark, IMA has been all about this and pivoting and helping makers moving forward within there. You have so many examples, maybe a couple things that you were thrilled about from what companies were able to do.
Well, I tell you, it's the greatest global economic and health crisis in generations, if not our nation's history. And the thing that makes me so proud is exactly what Missy just said, to see the innovation and the ingenuity. And very similarly to what she said, you know, you have companies like 3M that used surge capacity they learned under H1N1 a decade ago, and they're going to make 2 billion masks this year. Our liquor companies, you know, Diageo, Anheuser-Busch, and others making the hand sanitizer, not just the large companies, as she said, the small distilleries and microbreweries. One of my favorites, we had a company that made metal shelving that was getting ready to close down, and they thought, you know, we can make hospital beds. And they literally within 72 hours flipped over making emergency hospital beds for use in McCormick Place that include an antimicrobial mixture on them. John Deere made face shields. Ford and GM started making ventilators. I mean, it was amazing. Even small companies. I had a ceramics company that called, said, I'm not sure what we can do to help, but kind of plug us in, coach. And so up and down the line, but particularly those small and mid-sized companies, it was a wartime-like effort that literally, as I mentioned at the outset, we've had 1,000 companies sign up, and some, you know, make an end product, and others just say, hey, I'm in plastics or I'm in metals, what do you need made? And we have another great company, Pioneer Services, that gave up a fairly profitable line to start making parts at essentially cost for a company making ventilators. And so it really was heartening to see what manufacturers did. And again, as Missy mentioned, the innovation and ingenuity and the ability to quickly flip and scale up was really something to behold. And now it's, you know, moving forward, what do they do? And that's one of the big questions. Do they continue making those products? We're going to be in this, you know, kind of pandemic type environment for a while. So it's going to be really interesting to see the next 3, 6 months, a year, whether these companies, you know, go back to what they were doing before, or do they continue making these products?
Yeah, great examples. I mean, we have plenty in Michigan. I mean, Mark already mentioned, you know, Ford and GM and the move to ventilators. We had Festo take their laser technology and create the sensor for the ventilators, or a new kind of sensor to go into ventilators. You could run up and down the line of companies in Michigan that shifted as well. But let's talk about the state and how MEDC pivoted to support businesses, and looking forward, how are you taking care of companies looking to establish a presence, because this has been a big change for your operations too, Vlatko. You haven't been on any flights to Germany, in the last 6 months.
No, that's a great point. And I think our traditional economic development tool set, right, offering consulting services to prospective companies, that core is still there. So being able to assess a company's business plan, find customers, do a potential B2B roadmap, site selection, all of those tools are still there. I would say the most crucial piece where we have pivoted is probably on the incentive side, where we have quickly shifted our grant structure that we usually award to companies for job creation. We have now pivoted away, understanding that companies are going through a contraction right now, and that those tools might not be the most relevant anymore. So we have shifted some of those structures to enable them to pivot more efficiently, specifically with like Mark mentioned, with the ventilator production or other companies that are producing hand sanitizers. So making capital available to them, but really changing the structure of the support that we generally award to companies for job creation now has been awarded towards pivoting into these new segments, so to say, for them. So that has been probably one of the biggest shifts that we have undergone. And then the other piece is simply being more connected to our overseas partners. So what that specifically means, if it's the AHK or if it's the US Commercial Services, we're really partnering with them in all of the different regions in Germany to understand what are some of the needs that prospective companies are looking for before making the investment. I think I've listened to a lot of economists say there's probably not going to be a U-shaped recovery, and I would fully agree with that. We're looking at more of a Nike swoosh symbol, right, where we've gone through the worst part, I believe, but now it's going to take probably 12 to 18 months to recover. And as we're going through this recovery, we're going to see less capital expenditures, but what we will see is a greater demand for information, both on the labor side and access to talent, but also on the capital side. What are some of the capital programs that could be made available to companies looking to establish some type of presence in each of our states?
Well said. Mark Lorenzo on the line, Iowa, you already food being one of the first industries to get the spotlight in the pandemic, and food supply is something intrinsically linked to Iowa, if not the entire Midwest. Have there been any trends you've seen now looking forward for FDI inquiries or companies that are looking to invest in projects in Iowa around food or other industries because of what Iowa was able to do in keeping that food supply going?
Yeah, I'll make some comments, Mark. Certainly, first of all, we had a fairly healthy slate of projects underway we're quite proud of, especially those that look at our real cost advantages in things like fermentation and using available raw materials and feedstocks, and especially with energy-intensive industries because of our competitive electric rates and also the availability of water and wastewater treatment. Some very common things, if you want to say that, as you know, drive that industry. And then the other thing is certainly transportation logistics, being in the center of North America and be able to efficiently move products. So those, luckily, those strong points, and there's several projects that are, again, driven by those, that remain on and obviously are looking for, as has been mentioned, that opportunity for a virtual site tour or an update, near in the future. And the other thing is certainly our efforts working on, if you want to say the term reshoring or onshoring, are critical for us, underway anyway. And again, for a lot of these, good domestic supply chains, and as you've mentioned, we certainly learned, especially in the meat processing industry, one of the advantages for small business there is if you were a meat locker, if you're a food processor, you're immediately busy. You probably were busy anyway, but if you wanted something processed, you were definitely going to be very, very busy, and remains today. So there is that question and that interest in, where does my food come from? More, domestically produced food, locally produced food, and certainly working with our, high quality meat processors. And I think the final thing I'll say is that, you know, if you will, the very strong interest and focus on the renewable society, the sustainable society. Will we continue to use resources wisely? Will we start to reuse resources, if you will, with an increasing focus on sustainability and reduced carbon? So those are things that I think we can certainly play a role in as well.
Well covered. Christoph, now that we're on this FDI topic looking forward, you mentioned Department of Commerce, the BEA, just put out some of its new data a couple weeks ago. Obviously, that's backwards looking. But at the same time, we have the topic of travel restrictions, you know, some protectionist policies. The aluminum tariffs popped up again. But on the other side, you have the national interest exceptions allowing business travelers into the U.S. Where do you see that going from an FDI perspective now, as you're taking a look at how German business matters in the U.S. going forward?
I try to stay optimistic again.
Okay.
But you are right. So it's a great question, and I started by describing a little bit how heavily Germany is invested in the United States, and so this is just like another example for how networked and how connected Germany and German businesses are all around the world. And with this, it comes that you also need to not only connect virtually, you need to send people over to the US and vice versa actually as well, in order to take care of machineries, and you need to send service technicians, engineers, in order to be able to keep operating. So that's why it's frustrating to see that there are like two big issues. I mean, the first issue is understandable in a way that so for health reasons you want to restrict travels from hotspot areas such as Brazil, China, the Schengen states, the UK. So it's somewhat understandable. The European Union is doing the same, or used to do the same. However, then the pandemic also got politicized by putting restrictions on green card applications, on H-1B, L and J visa, making it much harder to come into the United States or get a non-immigrant work visa. And so in a way, this fits into the narrative of the current administration. It's more like a protectionist narrative. The USTR, the US State Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, he published a big article in the Foreign Affairs magazine, I think in June, writing on 14 pages how important it is to rebuild manufacturing in the United States, because most Americans don't have a high school or college degree, and for them we need to find jobs. And so it's somewhat like a backwards looking agenda, pushing for manufacturing is a great idea, but so it also could be pushing for advanced manufacturing. So the travel restrictions is really a big problem. As I said, German companies need to send over their engineers and their service technicians, and whatever associations in Germany you asked and who did surveys, basically 2/3 of the member companies, they are always saying the same. It's really affecting the business right now, and it's because it's impossible to get into the United States. And you mentioned the national not national security, the national interest exceptions. So this is true, and so you can apply as a German company with the US consulate. You can hand in your application and argue you are part of the economic recovery for the US, and that's why you need this exception. However, anecdotally, unfortunately, we hear, so while these applications are received, there's really huge backlog, because the State Department and all the consulates, they are working right now on first helping US citizens. That this is their priority. And so it's really in the back burner. This is what we hear. So until engineers and service technicians can come over again to the US, I can frame it optimistic. It will be possible eventually, but it will take a couple of more months. And yeah.
The good news is quite a few I know of are getting into the US right now that have worked through the backlog. My colleague who runs our Atlanta office has been doing so from Europe for the last couple of months, but he's on a flight today heading to Atlanta. So he got through, and quite a few of our member companies have gotten people through the process. So we're starting to see those openings and glimmers of hope, I think. Going to some of the audience questions now. Looking at Midwestern states and tourism got brought up a couple times a little bit, the hospitality industry, also agritourism. Wisconsin, I know a lot of Illinois residents have headed up to Wisconsin as opposed to taking a big summer vacation elsewhere in the US or abroad. They've chosen to stay closer to home and headed to Wisconsin. Michigan certainly as well. Maybe Missy, what role do you see Midwestern states playing in Wisconsin tourism? Obviously a sector that's been hit really hard by the pandemic.
Yeah, it's still hard to kind of wrap our arms around what exactly the impact has been. We've seen just, you know, outright devastation in our tourism industry. At the same time, you know, we have amazing outdoor resources and recreation. And so we're seeing, like you mentioned, you know, Illinois, Minnesota, we're seeing some kind of driving travel starting to increase. Of course, you know, this is a real challenge, again, in this balance between public health and economic health. And, you know, how do you promote that, but at the same time promote it in a safe way? And so we are just at the Wisconsin Tourism Department slowly kind of getting our feet under us as far as that goes. We're saying, you know, especially to within Wisconsin, if you're choosing to travel within Wisconsin, please do that in a safe manner. It's an opportunity to you know, go visit. We've got lots of kind of day trip ideas and things like that. But please do it safely, and please do it, you know, keeping in mind what the businesses are asking for. And we have a whole effort with our businesses that we've given CARES Act money to, that we're calling the We're All In. We're all in this together. And we're asking businesses to put up signage in their windows that reflects we're all in, we're doing this together. And so WEDC is actually working really closely with the tourism department. We're separate departments in Wisconsin, to make sure that our businesses are talking to each other and working on that. So it's definitely, you know, we were excited about rolling this forward, but we're tentative also, and wanting to do that really carefully. Something else that we're trying to wrap our arms around is the impact of canceled events. So in Wisconsin, we love to get together. Like, that is our thing. We are like social animals. Going back to the beer, but you know, and the Packers, you know, these places, yeah, these places where we get everybody together, whether it's the Oshkosh Air Show or games at Lambeau Field, the DNC, you know, the impact of that lost economic opportunity, and just trying to understand, you know, as Mark mentioned, this is once in a lifetime. So trying to understand what happens when those events are canceled. Where does that economic impact and opportunity go? Does it just dissipate, or is it still within the community? You know, how can we recreate it? So that, I think, tourism and the loss of those events is really something that is continuing to unveil itself, shall we say.
Okay, well said. Vlatko, another audience question from one of our Michiganders, actually. Yelp reported that about 800 small businesses have closed permanently in greater Metro Detroit. Based on your numbers and what you're seeing at MEDC, are those numbers accurate, maybe too low? Obviously, if it's coming from Yelp, I'm assuming that's very much small businesses, restaurants, those types.
Yeah, that's a good question. I did see the report as well, and it does line up with what we're seeing, and most of that is unfortunately in the restaurant segment and the hospitality segment. And I think a lot of that has to do with kind of where the hotspots within the state have been when it comes to COVID-19, and then also having the plan to reopen certain segments, but slowly. You know, our governor always talks about it's not going to be a switch where you go from off to on, but it's going to be a dial where we re-engage certain segments and also areas, geographic areas of the state, which are really a huge, but no, the numbers are very much in line with what we're tracking and we're seeing as well.
Okay. Maybe one more shift, and anybody in the audience, if you want to drop in another question, we'll go there. Mark, from a company perspective now, looking forward, what's on your wish list in terms of things going forward? What's going to make a difference to manufacturers now partway through this pandemic?
You know, I kind of wish I had an easy answer to that. You know, we're looking in a study, manufacturers are optimistic. More than, 50% have an optimistic outlook. The number of open manufacturing jobs jumped by more than 30,000 last month. There's about 340,000 open manufacturing jobs in the United States. So they're starting to rehire, but, I think the uncertainty is really hurting. They don't know what consumer demand is going to be. And, within the manufacturing sector, and I think someone mentioned earlier, but auto and aerospace really struggled. And then you had, medical and food and chemicals really did well. And so it was a little bit of a mixed bag for manufacturers. But, what states can do is I tell policymakers in Springfield and Washington is first do no harm. Every business is struggling. I mean, you talk about the tourism business. Chicago is a hub for that, our hotels and, baseball and football and basketball. But don't do anything to make it worse would be my first. And then for the manufacturing sector, companies are going to look to reshore, as I think Mark mentioned in Iowa. What policies can we implement to get companies to locate their supply chains here in the United States? Don't put all your eggs in one basket if you've only got one or two suppliers. I think companies are starting to do that. So, in Illinois, they need to look at policies, like the graduated tax that we're fighting right now. We have some strong challenges here with our budget and our pensions that other states don't have. And so specifically with Illinois, getting rid of some of these bureaucratic, cumbersome laws and rules that make it more difficult for businesses to operate. And then really that focus on the SMEs. Not that it's easier for larger companies to survive, but a lot of times, they do have a deeper bench financially and they can get access to capital and funds. Those small companies, the restaurants and retail in particular, are really, really struggling. And so we need to get another act done federally to help them. Every state unemployment insurance is having to borrow. Illinois is going to be $8 to $15 billion in debt. In 0809, we were $2.5 billion, and every state across the country is having that. So again, there's got to be some help from the federal government. And then, the EDCs that are on this call today in Illinois, it really is working and identifying those and trying to help them get capital, ease rules and regulations, and just making sure they can operate, because it's going to be a challenge for a long time, I think.
Okay. You brought up the word challenge. As we're getting close to close now, I think I'd like to go through the panelists and maybe one quick note of optimism that you see going forward in your environment, in your state, in the companies you're working with. Think through really what's that one sign of hope for the future where you say, hey, things are going to get better, or when they get better, here's what's going to be driving us forward. So I think I'll start kind of backwards from how we went initially in our state order at least. But Mark Lorenzo, if you're, I believe, still on the audio, what do you see as a positive for Iowa going forward, or from your perspective?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, our kind of, if you will, full force forward into renewable energy, if you will, phrase almost trite, but the green economy. Will there be a green recovery? Will there be greater support for renewables? We've obviously seen in the petroleum sector the damage, price of oil. And from our part of America, we have a lot of fine companies that ship their product on those Class 1 rails all the way to California to take advantage of that low carbon fuel standard. And again, with the challenge side, with the EPA and the renewable fuel standard, is there a regional, is there a Midwestern low carbon fuel standard? Is there a different way to look at carbon and to value carbon? Again, challenging things, but a green recovery and you know, greater emphasis on sustainability and the full cycle for products might benefit businesses. Develop some, if you will, along the lines of innovation, and obviously to fulfill a consumer need as well.
Great point. Vlatko, Michigan.
Yeah, great question, Mark. I mean, I think there's a couple areas that I'm really optimistic and excited about. And one of them, I think, is going to be across all of our states, and that's the relationship and greater communication with our internal departments to making sure that safety is at the forefront of everybody, and then also the greater collaboration between the companies within each one of our states and the regulatory bodies. I think a lesson learned from Michigan is how, you know, what is the impact on these restrictions on businesses? What is the impact of travel restrictions for our economy that has over 4,000 corporates operating in Michigan? And I think that greater collaboration is really starting to show. And then also, lastly, I would just say what I'm really excited about is the relationship with the GACC and with your team, because that opportunity is still there to drive foreign direct investment, I think, across all of our regions, because it's increasing the dialogue, it's learning from each other. What are the challenges in the different states, and what are some of the resources available for existing companies, but also for new companies that are looking to come in?
Missy is our sponsor. I'll let you have the closing words. So I'll jump to Mark Denzler from the IMA, your optimism.
Sure, my optimism, and I'll leave you with 3 points. Number one, the Cubs are in first place. Number two, this will be the first year that Illinois football doesn't lose to Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin in the same year, or that we don't lose in 1 year.
Or Northwestern.
But you know, my sense of optimism, and I said this at the outset, is I'm so proud of manufacturers. They have met every challenge in our nation's history, and I have no doubt that they are going to come up with vaccines and therapies and treatments. You know, several are in phase 3 right now, and so I'm really optimistic about manufacturing and innovation and ingenuity. And this is, you know, certainly we've been speeding along Industry 4.0. And I think this just accelerates it. And I just think back in, you know, my 50 years of being on this earth, you know, the changes that we've seen. And I think that, you know, I hate to say it, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. But I think this is going to force companies to think outside the box, to innovate, to imagine new possibilities, and kind of, you know, move forward in a new world. And I think manufacturers are going to lead the way.
Christoph, DC. Does optimism get linked to DC still?
Absolutely, like always. So I mean, we all know that the transatlantic relationship could be a little better economically. It's still strong, and so I see a lot of optimism that there's still a lot of topics we can talk about from both sides of the Atlantic, and we never should forget that the transatlantic market is the biggest worldwide. So it's a very powerful market that we have here, and if we work together, we just can achieve much more. And there are really topics we all can identify with, be it sustainability, digitalization, apprenticeship. So all these topics, we find open ears in the administration and with US Congress. There are other topics, it's a little harder. But so that would be my optimism, that there's a huge potential for collaboration. And last but not least, at one point, the pandemic also will be over, and then business will do better, much better again.
Okay. Missy, Wisconsin, land of optimism, Gemütlichkeit, all these great things. What do you see going forward?
Yeah, I would guess that you guys have a sense at this point that I'm a pretty optimistic person, but you know, in the face of a pandemic, I still see opportunity and excitement. But I have to say that you know, in the next few weeks, the thing I'm most excited about is that Haribo, the iconic German company, is going to be breaking ground on their first North American factory right here in Wisconsin. And there's absolutely nothing that can make you feel happier than gummy bears. So we're good here in Wisconsin. We're looking forward to the future.
Haribo definitely brings lots of smiles. The one other thing going forward for everyone, our team right now, together with many of the people on this call, are working together on our Invest in Midwest brochure to keep telling these good stories and bringing that investment to the Midwest. The good news is we still do have interest from German companies in continuing to expand their operations here, particularly in manufacturing, but other industries as well. And that's something we're not going to give up on. We're going to keep working on, and building those bridges between Germany and the US are critically important as part of our mission. Thank you all for being a big part of making that happen, from taking care of our companies, from working with them all to be successful. It really takes a team to make that happen, and that's what our network's all about. So thanks for contributing your thoughts here, your insights, and we'll look forward for everybody listening. We'll resume back the next sessions, start back up at 1:15 Central Time, so 2:15 Eastern, with the second breakouts around cash flow and M&A. And then the other one being workforce, two critical issues that our panelists highlighted here as well. So thank you once again, everybody. I'll turn you in or let you go to your afternoon, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks,
everyone.
Bye,
Take
all.
care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.